Hello, welcome to Section 5, Part 11, where we're going to look at implementing double-click to select all of a type of entity that's in the viewport. This section is going to touch on a few of the plugins, so we're going to have to modify RTS Player, and that'll interface with RTS Core, and it will be used in RTS entities. So I think this is the best place for it though in Section 5 because it is to do with selecting entities in the end. This will probably be the last part of selection before we move on to the command system. I thought about covering command groups, but I think I'll wait until I've sorted out what I'm going to do with the UI implementation for the framework, as it sort of relies on having a UI to see what command groups you have and things like that. And by command groups, I mean like, selecting a group, pressing Control 1, and then you can access that group by pressing 1, like you normally would in any RTS practically. So we're going to start the implementation of the double click in the RTS player. We're actually going to implement a custom trigger type. So this is for enhanced input. We're creating a custom trigger type. So I'm going to add that under framework. Called an input trigger. I'm going to call it RTS player. I'm going to be calling it double tap. I'm going to put it in framework input folder. We've got a few view class parameters we're going to put in here. Not blueprintable, small API, which means we need to remove that API reference. And then we're going to add a display name. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm not really sure what this not input configurable is. It must be something to do with when you go to set up player input, but I couldn't find any references for it. But it was in the reference that I found to set up a double tap, so I'm going to leave it in there. If anyone does know what exactly this does, please let me know in the comments. We need to remove the API because we're using the minimal API. So we're going to need a setting for delay, and this will be essentially the click delay that the double tap is triggered by. And we're going to override a function from the input trigger base class. That's the trigger state. And then we'll just have another private member here that we're going to use to calculate the trigger state, and it will be a last tap time. So in here we just want to check what we're passing in is valid, so check that player input is valid. And then from the player input we want to get the player controller that's connected to that player input. And then we're going to use that player controller to get a world reference. So we just want to check we can the world. So if all that stuff's valid, we then want to check if the input action value that's coming in is actuated. You can see that the last value is the value past the update state on the previous tick. So we're just checking that that's not valid anymore or not actuated. And if that is the case, then we can go into checking for our double tap. So we need to get the current time of this tap. And that's going to be our world reference that we need here. Check our current time minus our last tap time is less than the delay we've configured, and we've achieved a double tap, so we can trigger the trigger. And reset that. And our triggered state. Now if it's not, then we need to set our last tap time to the current time. And then failing everything, we just return trigger state of none. That is it, that's our trigger double tap. So now we need to start implementing it. So we're going to come across to our input data here. And I'll add it underneath command here, call it double tap. I'm going to set it up as a whole separate action. Once it's set in there, we then need to bind the action in our player pawn. going to be a trigger only. I'll put it under rotate here. A call function input double tap, which we don't have yet. Let's create that function. So in the function, we're going to do the same thing as the command end here. We're going to go to our interface and we're going to call double tap. Go to our interface now in RTS core and add the double tap. Because it's on the interface, we need to go to where the interface is implemented on our entities player controller and implement it. So let's just close off some of these now. We don't need those. Don't need the player anymore. Need the controller. So now we need to treat double tap as sort of similar to like a select and a select end. So we're going to reset what we're selecting here, bring that in. Then we want to grab the client hit selectable as well. So whatever we double tap, we need a reference to that. So that's to be the object that we double click on. And now we need to build a list of entities of that type to select. So to do that, we're going to have to get the entities class. Let's create a function on our component to do that. Put that under data, I think. So we're going to return a subclass of our of a pawn. Could be anything, but it's going to, if it's selectable, it's going to be generally a pawn. If your game's going to have something different than selecting pawns, then I need to change that. And here we're actually going to have to reach into the entity settings because that's where we've got our map, our entities map, if you recall. And that's going to include the entity settings.h at the top. And now we need a reference to the entity data because we're going to have to read off the data what's the actual class type. So we want to look up, we want to grab the class and look up the actual class in the map. So the entity class in the data is an enum, and we can use that to look up the actual class in the entities map. I'll go back over the entities map in a sec. And the return from the entities map will be a soft class pointer. That's our entities map there, so it's a map of the class type enum to the actual class, blueprint class. Oh, sorry, I forgot the pointer. Always forgetting pointers. And now we just need to load it, or get it if it's already loaded. Load synchronous will do either or for us. And if any of that fails, come back to our player controller now. That's the class we're looking for. So now what we need to do is we need to go through all the player entities like we would for a box selection and filter out by class and if they're in the viewport or not. I think the fastest thing to do is going to be able to check the screen viewport. If we're on the viewport first, I think that'll be a faster action. So we'll need a vector 2D for that. And to do that, there's a U gameplay type, U gameplay statics, and that's going to have an include at the top if we don't already have that. I can't remember. Oh, actually, we will already have that because we're using the projector world to screen before. And then, so we're going to pass this player controller. And then the world position that we're going to pass in is this current entity's position. And we want it to input to the screen location. If that operation is successful, that'll return true. And then we want to just confirm that it's actually in our viewport. So to do that, we're going to use that screen location. So that's going to check if it's in the x-axis from 0 to the size of the screen. And then we'll just do the same for y. And then we can check the class. So current entity. Now, if any of this fails, the way if statements work is it doesn't even check the last one. So that's why you want to do your larger eliminators first. And potentially this is not going to be too costly anyway, but I'm pretty sure a screen check will be, it's just comparing a couple of vectors. So I think it'll be faster than checking a class against it, one against another. So if the entity is in the screen and it is the same class, we're going to add it to our entities to select. So now we need to get the entities to select into actual selections, and we can reuse our box selection function to create group selections. So this is going to populate the client selections array. We can pass the pending selections straight in. So if you have a look at this function, we use it to build selections out of individual entities, and that's exactly what we're doing here. Now we need to handle the local selection, so the highlighting and the whatnot. We've got a function for that already. So we didn't make a combined one, did we? We've just been using both like that. I'll do. And then we need to send it to the server for actual selection. The Kismet gameplay statics to include there. So let's give that a build. They've gone wrong anywhere. So in here we've got a few things we need to do. We've got to come into the player input actions. We need to create a default action. So it's going to be the same. It's just going to be a bool. So 8.1 call it double tap. And then inside our double tap, we come in and leave it as digital, and we can add a trigger. And we should have our double tap trigger in here. And that'll have our delay setting there. So if you want it to be faster or slower, you can modify that. That's that. And then in our data, our input data, we need to assign it. So the double tap. And then in our context, we need to add a mapping for it. And the mapping will just be left mouse button. So let's give it a go. Now, these are all the same class, so select them all. Now let's get like half on the screen. There we go. Double tap select. Thanks for watching.